Thank you so much for taking out your time to stop by on the platform. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's definitely an honor to hear more about it.
Well, thank you. I'm gratified by your interest.
For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are, where you're from, and definitely what do you do?
Okay. My name is David Joselit. I teach in the Department of Art, Film, and Visual Studies at Harvard University. And my scholarly work has to do with, you might say, a kind of thermodynamics of images, how images move and mean through their movements. I've worked on television, globalization, abstract painting, and various other contemporary and modern issues.
Wow, okay, that definitely sounds interesting. Now, what courses do you teach, and are you in a traditional classroom setting or something different?
Um, Usually, yes, I'm in a traditional classroom setting, and my classes move from or range from very conventional um, surveys of art history in the modern era, which I've done with colleagues, to classes that try to approach different issues in modern art that might be more relevant to advanced students, such as graduate students. For instance, last year I taught a class called The Present Tense, which tried to understand how various modern writers and artists tried to represent the moment, which sounds, like it would be very easy, but in fact, it's very hard to stay in the present. And so we started with the writer Gertrude Stein and moved all the way up to artificial intelligence. And sometimes I work with graduate students in a studio setting. Some of our graduate students, though they're writing a dissertation, also have an artistic practice. So we do a kind of critique class with them.
Wow, okay, okay, that definitely sounds amazing. You had mentioned AI. I would like to know, regardless of who I interview, if they're doing music, if they're doing film, if they're doing, medicine, everybody has, I guess their perspective on artificial intelligence. If you could speak on your perspective and how that has affected the work and the passion that you have for it.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, people are thinking a lot about artificial intelligence and um, including artists who, some of whom are using it as a tool. One way of thinking about artificial intelligence as a tool is to think about how photography, invented in the mid 19th century, 1839, um, was feared as a replacement for visual art in early times, but has more or less become a kind of a tool for artists in a variety of different media, from sculptors to painters. So the question will be, I mean, I think it's hard to imagine that human artists or human derived images will cease to exist, but obviously AI will create a new kind of image economy. New things will be more easily possible. Old things will perhaps look outdated in a certain kind of way. And so artificial intelligence may um, persist as a kind of a tool. But more aesthetically, there are a couple of an argument I made recently in a short text I published um, had to do with how meaning is made out of collections of images, and it's important to remember that artificial intelligence is derived from a collection. Just it's a kind of museum, a digital museum, as it were, which is scraped from the internet and which requires a kind of curatorial agency in the sense that human beings have to label the work, scrub it for its legibility to the machine, etc. So to some degree, what AI does is make meaning out of collections. And I tried to make the argument that museums also, from their initial moment as public institutions in the late 18th century, also create meanings, often political meanings, through collections. The difference, one important difference, I mean, there are many obviously, but is that the curators of museums are well respected, whereas what you might call the curators of AI, the people who actually um, identify and label the data, are actually you know, micro workers who don't get a lot of respect and um, aren't considered essential to the process in the same kind of way. The last thing I'll say about this is that I think that the art of the prompt will be um, extremely important, at least in the near term. And really anyone who's tried AI, and I've only, I don't use it extensively, but that it's only as good as the prompt and the kind of sequence of prompts that you make. So it's interesting to think about, the prompt as a kind of genre almost that might be developed through the interest in AI.
Wow, okay, that's very interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. I would like to know this. When did you develop this passion for art? Is it something that you've been into since you were a child, or did you kind of get into it later in life?
In fact, it was something I was interested in quite young. I grew up outside of Chicago and I used to go on my own to the museum. And, my parents weren't terribly excited by my studying art history because they wanted me to do something that would be a more, kind of bankable, let's say, career. But yeah, I was interested I'm not quite sure why, but I was.
Okay, okay. Now, you're an author as well. I wanted to ask you about some of your books. If you could just speak about maybe what influenced you to write and what exactly is that book about, a book about in particular, arts properties?
Sure. Well, Arts Properties is inspired by really the present situation we're in, where identity has become, I would say, weaponized in the sense that we think of our identities as property. Not everyone feels this way, but many have taken identity as a kind of property that should not be shared. So, a gay person like myself um, should is legitimate to talk about questions of gayness, but maybe not questions of blackness since I'm a white person. And what I wanted to do, and what I do in a lot of my work, is to give a historical genealogy for this particular moment of turning identity into property. And I tried to trace it through how works of art began to be understood in terms of the nationality and qualities of the artists themselves, and then how this became, instead of a mere aspect of that identity, a kind of bankable quality, a kind of property that could be exchanged and have its own value. And the book focuses on a controversy that happened at the Whitney Museum in a recent biennial, one of their big exhibitions, where a white artist, Dana Schutz, appropriated the image of Emmett Till, the young African American boy. I mean, he was a boy, a young man, who was lynched on account of allegedly looking inappropriately at a white woman. And Dana Schutz was assailed for kind of appropriating the pain of blackness for her own purposes. And I tried to understand this controversy with more nuance by arguing that, in fact, it wasn't wrong of her a priori or without any extenuating circumstances to work with images drawn from the history of Black pain, but that she handled the image in a way that wasn't respectful ultimately. And so the problem was not the effort to empathize. The problem was the inadequate work done in that act of empathy, in appropriating this extremely painful image of the corpse of Emmett Till.
Okay, okay. Now, can I ask you, how long does it take for you, or for that project in particular, how long did it take to put that together?
Well, it's funny, in a way that was the I mean, it's not a long book, it's an essay length book. Um, all of the books I've written, I think there have been 6 to date, have been different, really. That book I wrote actually quite fast, but it was almost like a postscript to a book called Heritage and Debt: Art and Globalization that I had written before that one that took me a really long time, like 8 or 10 years to figure out. And it was really a nice convergence of circumstances in this case, because I had taught a graduate seminar during the pandemic where we were working through the French philosopher Michel Foucault's work in terms of definitions of the human and various kind of responses to the definition of the human as a universal thing from African American thinkers and other thinkers of color. And this book idea sort of congealed in my mind. And because it was the pandemic, and I happened to be on sabbatical that semester, there was really nothing else to do, as it were. And so I wrote that book really quickly, but that is not the norm for me. It usually takes a while.
Okay, okay. Now I can ask you this. I guess the heritage and debt that was closer to the pandemic, and then art properties is post pandemic. Have you seen a significant change? Whether it be the perspective of the artist and the work of the artist, or even the art lovers, the people that love the art.
Hmm. Well, I mean, we're I'm US based, and um, we're in a very um, particular time where a number of factors, from the pandemic to the rise of populism, the election of Trump a second time, um, the the kind of prominence and importance of Black Lives Matter in 2020. Obviously, not. It had been that was a movement that was very strong before then, but it's kind of rise in prominence, and then the reaction to it against various questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, including where I teach at Harvard. Our president was basically drummed out by congressional and donor pressure on account of her commitments to those principles, as well as probably the fact that she herself was personally African American. All of these changes, I think, have had real changes in the art world, and I don't think you can exactly um, you can't it's hard to put a finger on exactly what has happened, or to say, oh, this artist's work has changed in this way. I think that there has definitely been a consolidation in bigger galleries. There is more interest in painting, I think, and perhaps a more conservative idea of what people want to show. I think there's a lot of doubt about what the future is bringing. I mean, obviously, these developments are very strong in the United States, but they're also happening in Europe and Latin America and elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Now I wanted to ask you about the journal October. If you could
Mhm.
speak about that. What exactly is it, and what is your role in it?
Yeah, October is a journal that was founded in, I believe it was 1971, but I can't promise that that's absolutely accurate, by two brilliant former writers for Art Forum, Rosalind Krauss and Annette Michelson. Annette had sadly died a few years ago. And so it's been going for quite a long time. And the idea was to introduce um, critical theory, largely European philosophy, into art history. And in the 70s, this was a new thing. Now it's become a very normal thing. And in fact, something that is criticized by many people, a kind of over theorization of the field. So I've been an editor for, I think, something over 10 years. There's an editorial board. We run magazine or the journal collectively. So each of us organizes projects, um, often in partnership with others, and then we solicit contributions from elsewhere. But lately, the thing I think I'm most proud of is that we've been trying to, we're a scholarly journal. We're not a periodical that comes out frequently. We have 4 numbers a year, but we've been trying to use more and more the model of the questionnaire to survey a wide range of scholars on issues that seem pertinent to our moment. So we just did an AI questionnaire, for instance. We've done one on decolonization in recent years, on the diaspora. So I think that this model is a really good one in the sense that it it um, approaches pressing contemporary issues, but it does so through a contribution that is theoretically grounded but short, and therefore readable, and also a range of voices that are broader than usually appear in the journal. So it's a format that I think really works for us, and that has been a kind of adaptation in the long life of the journal. We've used it for a long time, but I think it has greater relevance right now in the present.
Okay, okay. Now I wanted to ask you about an exhibit that you organized in Germany. If you could speak about, what was I guess, the inspiration behind that, the process, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was co-organ. I was one of 3 organizers. It was at a museum called the Brandhorst Museum in Munich, initiated by Achim Hochdorfer, who is the director there. And he was interested in how um, there were many practices in painting in the middle of the 20th century, um, let's say the 50s through the 70s, that had been sidelined by certain powerful critical narratives of uh, kind of abstractions importance over other forms of painting, etc. And so one of the major themes that I was more focused on was how new media, electronic and digital media, um, help to transform an old medium like painting. So it was called Painting 2.0, in a kind of allusion to the web, the internet 2.0.
Okay, wow, that sounds amazing. And get to do what you love and do it on a global level. People just even dream about visiting places like that, let alone co-organize an exhibit.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a great experience.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It sounds amazing. Now I can ask you, with the writing that you're doing, the teaching, and the exhibits, have you ever thought about doing maybe like a documentary about any of these things?
No, it's funny you should ask, because I'm in a department that where I was chair for the last 3 years and will be chair again after my sabbatical this year. That includes a lot of documentary filmmakers. Um, and so I've been in closer touch with documentary filmmaking than I have been really throughout, for my career up to now. But no, that's not something I've thought about.
Oh, okay, wow, but that's cool though. I mean, or even the film, a story, it would just
Hmm.
be amazing to see
Hmm.
more of that. Now, are you currently working on any projects or books or exhibits or anything?
Yeah, I am trying to. This goes back to your question about how long it takes. I'm trying to figure out how to position a next book project, and so I'm doing a lot of reading on history, actually, and how different, how the past and the present mix together, different theories of how different, let's say, temporalities or experiences of time come together and perhaps conflict with one another. And so at the moment, I don't have I can't really give you a good summary, but it's sort of like creating a big cloud of ideas that hopefully something specific um, will precipitate out of.
Okay, okay, yeah, I definitely look forward to that. Let me see, we about 20 minutes in, so if it's okay, maybe I can ask you about one or two more of your books.
Sure.
Okay, did we already cover American art since 1945? Did you speak on that?
Now, that it's funny. I mean, again, I'll go back to this question of what it takes to write something. I I was working on a book which came out as Feedback Television Against Democracy, where I was interested in trying to understand the relationship between video art, which emerges in the late 60s and 70s once Portapak video cameras become widely available and artists begin to use them. And but it but that was the same period as cable TV initially. Now, cable TV now we understand as purely commercial, but in the 70s, cable TV was public access TV. You could literally go and get cameras at your local cable station. I mean, if there was one near you, and people could use those cameras to make programs. So I was interested in video activism, commercial television, and video art. And it was a really hard project to figure out. And I felt sort of at a crisis point. And then I was asked to write this book on that was for a broader public in a series of such books called The World of Art at Thames and Hudson, um, the American art since 1945. So it was a very different kind of project. In some ways, it was more easy. There was more existing ways of thinking about that narrative, but in thinking through the period carefully and writing for a more accessible audience or more accessibly, I was able to figure out, or it helped me, it gave me the time to figure out how to finish that other book. So they're kind of weirdly tied together, although they're quite different.
Wow, okay, okay, that definitely sounds interesting as well. And I can ask you about one more book, Infinite Regress.
hmm That was my dissertation, and it's on the artist Marcel Duchamp, who's best known for inventing the ready-made, which was a practice in the 19 teens. He invented it from 15 to 18, um, where you present ordinary commodities in the place of art, which has been extremely influential as a practice since he first initiated it. And so that book was drawn from my dissertation for my PhD, and it tried to give a reading of his work that had to do with a kind of play or dialectic between material that is unshaped and a kind of measurement of that material, a specification of it. And the way the ready-made fit in that is that Duchamp, the way you transform an ordinary thing like a snow shovel or a urinal to objects that he used in that context is to what he called inscribe them, which could mean literally writing on them, or in other ways displacing them from their initial context. So in a sense, even though that's not a measurement, it's a reframing of a material thing through language and through space, through putting something in a place it's not supposed to be, a urinal in a museum instead of a urinal in a men's room.
Right, right. Okay. Wow, wow. So yeah, I want to thank you again so much for taking out the time to stop by. I really appreciate the information that you shared and definitely the work that you're doing. I definitely, definitely look forward to seeing the work that you have coming in the future as well.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Tay.